Good morning, everyone. This is our last 10 minutes of Torah before Passover starts. So, welcome. I hope everyone is doing well. And hope you're all managing. Hi Gail, hi Carl, hi Dale, Della, Shalom Aleichem. So, question for you. How many matzahs do we have for the Seder? 3. And what's the reason that we have 3 matzahs? There's a number of reasons. One reason is because it's connected to it's symbolizing the Kohen, the Levi, and the Israel, the Israelite. Another reason is a practical reason. We have typically on a Chag, just like Shabbat, for example, Shavuot, we start our Sudat Yom Tov, our holiday meal, with a very particular format of beginning with Kiddush over wine, and then we have the 2 chalot. We have the 2 challahs on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. We need to have 2 for the reason that we know that the Jewish people were told to collect a double portion of the manna on Friday, so they wouldn't have to go out on Saturday and collect. So since then, all Shabbos and Yom Tov meals, after Kiddush, we have 2 challahs. Now Pesach, of course, we don't have challah. So I know you'll enjoy making some French toast with whatever challah you might have left, and hopefully you're getting rid of it already, if it's not gone already. But we substitute the 2 challahs with 2 matzahs. And then we add a third. And that third one is to break for the afikomen. So that's why 2 reasons that we have 3 matzahs. But then there's another ritual of the 4 cups. And the 4 cups are symbolizing and hinting at the 4 terminologies of redemption that God used to take the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. V'otzesi, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, and then v'lakachti, and I'll take you out. So a lot of the Rishonim, a lot of the earlier commentators bring up a classic question. The question is, though we're well aware that there are other reasons that we have 3 matzahs, and we just went through them, we also know that the 3 matzahs are part of the Seder, and they are part of the overall motif and theme of redemption. In fact, if anything is a motif of redemption, it's the matzah, because the actual matzah structure of not rising embodies the central notion of Passover, which is that they left Egypt b'chipazon, in a hurry. And so, if anything is connected to the redemption, it's the matzah, because they weren't, drinking wine on their way out of Egypt. To the contrary, it wasn't that kind of night. There was only matzah. And if that's the case, then the matzah, in addition to its standard holiday functions, substituting the bread, should be much more centrally featured. And if that's the case, the sages ask, why not have 4 matzahs instead of 3 matzahs? Furthermore, drinking the 4 cups during the Seder has become part of the halachic religious norm of what a Seder encompasses. So it is a bona fide integral piece of the Seder, the whole picture of the Seder. But if you drill down a little deeper into the origins and the root of different steps of the Seder and different features of the Seder, we'll find that there are similarities and differences. For example, this is one of the big ones. In Jewish law and the religious structure of Judaism, there are different categories of Jewish laws, which on many levels don't really matter, because once something has become a Jewish law, its origins are less relevant certainly to the mode of observance. We observe laws with the same fervor and passion and stringency and enthusiasm regardless of their origin. But there are differences, and the big differences are whether something was mandated and prescribed in the Torah itself. When I say in the Torah itself, I mean it's part of the 5 books of Moses, Torah Shebiktav, as it's known, or whether something is part of Torah Sheba'al Peh, something that was extrapolated and interpreted from the Torah by the sages. That's called Midrabanan, or from the Chachamim. So the matzah is Midoraisa. The matzah, it says it explicitly in the Torah that you should eat matzah on this night. The wine, on the other hand, is something that was midrabanan originally. It was rabbinically introduced, and it's just as much a part of Torah, and it's just as vital and fundamental a part of the Seder. Nevertheless, it's good to know these origins. With that knowledge, however, one would think that the biblically ordained piece of the Seder should be featured more prominently in the way it ties to its central motif and theme. In addition, the fact that it's biblically mandated, that's another main primary reason that we should have 4 matzahs. As opposed, we don't have to have 3 cups of wine. We can have 4 cups of wine. But at the very least, we should have 4 matzahs. Both because conceptually and symbolically, it's a prominent feature, and because in terms of the root of the mitzvah, it's tracing it back fundamentally, it's more primary and it's midoraisa. It has a unique gravity and significance. So, in truth, however, if you think about it, the way that the Seder is structured, with the 3 cups, the 3 matzahs and the 4 cups of wine, is filled with a beautiful mystical intentionality. And it goes to the heart of mentorship and personal development, which in many ways is at the heart of experiencing an authentic and true sense of one's own self. That is an ultimate freedom, the freedom to be. Now, we are not born ready to be rolled out to be. It's a process. There's matriculation that goes into the full product of an adult who is prepared to be in a unique and beautiful way that only he or she can be in the world. It doesn't come in a vacuum. There's childhood and education and a long process to the point where a person can be introduced into the world or set free into the world to be who they are meant to be the missing piece of the puzzle that only they can fill. And so, in many ways, the paradigm for this is the redemption from Egypt. The redemption from Egypt has two elements to it, and those two elements are symbolized in many ways by the 3 matzahs on one hand and the 4 cups on the other hand. There's two paradigms here. There's the paradigm of being mentored and being educated, and then there's the paradigm of graduation and being able to exist outside of the influence of our mentorship, independent of the influence of whatever it is that figured so prominently in helping us define who we are. So, when the Jews were in Egypt, we can compare them to a student in the teacher's class that is still very much dependent on the critical role of the teacher. The acolyte who is deeply dependent on the mentor. And that's okay. That's why these roles exist in the world. They exist in the world so that there's a healthy process of education, of personal growth that is facilitated, but it's facilitated in order to empower and enable a person to then be autonomous and independent and to be able to function independently of the mentor. The way the exodus, the slavery and the exodus of Egypt is structured is very similar. It's structured in a way of dependence on one hand and independence on the other. The dependence, obviously, is the beginning of the process of the redemption. The Jewish people were in no way, shape, or form in a position to free themselves. They needed a savior. They needed their mentor. They needed their teacher. They needed that support. And that's okay. Sometimes we need help if we're in a situation that is dire. We can't be heroes in a vacuum. We have to be mature enough to understand when we need help. And this is a very prominent and fundamental basis in the world of recovery as well. You need to know when to call out for help. And the Jewish people in Egypt, when did God show up? when the Jewish people cried out. They said, Tata, we can't do it. I need help. And so God shows up, and he drags them out, and he lifts them up, and he redeems them. But then, in the 4 languages of redemption, the 4th one is already, if you deconstruct it and pay close attention to it, the language of Lakachta li la'am, I will take you to me, le'am, for a nation, even though it's still God saving them. This is already part of phase 2, where the Jews are brought to the foot of the Mount Sinai, of Mount Sinai. And at that point, there is a very strong element of their proactive participation in their own redemption. They are being asked at the foot of Sinai, relatively speaking, obviously, to take a step towards being and existing outside of the mentorship relationship, which means, first and foremost, that they had to have a conscious understanding of themselves as a separate enough existence to be called a nation. If you're not separated from God, at least consciously, at least have the sense or the illusion of being separated, then how can you be called a nation? You're not a nation, you're still part of God. So the self-perception of being a nation, even if it was just in the very, very infant stages, was the beginning of the cutting of the umbilical cord, so to speak, that was critical for the redemption to take root inside the person's own psyche, so that they begin to reflect on the ways that they need to save themselves as opposed to the ways that they are being saved. One of the issues that people encounter in the recovery world is there becomes, while the initial reaching out for help is healthy, subsequent inability to exist outside of that help creates a new addiction, essentially, of an addiction that is an addiction to being saved, essentially. And God didn't want that. God didn't want to perpetuate a mentality of victimhood. God wanted people to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And so the 4 languages of being saved, buried within them in that very last expression of redemption, is a seed that's been planted of saving oneself. And that's why there are 4 cups of wine, symbolizing the fullness of the process where we move from being mentored to being ultimately able to stand on our own 2 feet. Now that is very fitting, and it resonates actually beautifully with the very fact that the 4 cups of wine are not biblically mandated. To the contrary, they're introduced by the sages, obviously, through divine inspiration. And so, as we mentioned, it's still as authentically Torah as if it would be written in the 5 books of Moses. Nevertheless, the fact is that it came to us through the human conduit, of the human mind of the sages, which in itself, Torah Sheba'al Peh, is an embodiment of that ethos, of that value of being autonomous and independent, and being the student that can stand on their own 2 feet without the constant need to be propped up by the teacher. And so the teacher has done their job effectively, not when the student displays a growing dependence on the teacher, but to the contrary. When the student is able to embody the spirit of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of creativity and ingenuity outside of the halo, of the shadow, stepping out of the shadow of the mentor, then the teacher is a great teacher. But what about the matzah? Why don't we have 3 matzahs? Why don't we have 4 matzahs? I'm sorry. And the answer is very, very, very clear. The matzah is still very much wrapped up in the experience of being saved, as opposed to the phase 2 of saving oneself. And it doesn't really focus on that 4th expression of liberty that contains within it the impetus for self-help, for liberating oneself. The fact that it's biblically mandated drives that point home more, not less. Because things that are biblically mandated are actually symbolic of the way that we are in God's shadow. And that's okay. Actually symbolizes the ways in which we are deeply dependent and tied to God with an umbilical cord that can never be cut from that vantage point, nor should it be. And therefore, on a certain level, that feature exists always. There's always a place to go back and plug in when we're not feeling our ingenuity, when we're not feeling our creativity, when we're not feeling what we need to feel to be ourselves. We go back home. We go to the Torah. We go to the place where we're held, where we're saved, where we're coddled, where we're lifted up, where we're dragged out from the places we can't get out. And as genius and as creative and as thoughtful and as powerful as we are, we always need that. We always need a friend. We always need someone. And that always exists. And so it's important. The 3 as 3, to keep that intact, to symbolize how that's still a legitimate factor, and that it's okay to go home sometimes when we need it. It's okay, and it's necessary actually, to lean in to the safety and the all-encompassing nature of where we came from as opposed to where we have gone. And that's really Pesach in a nutshell. And that's what freedom is. Freedom is the freedom to be. And we have 2 frames of reference. The 3 matzahs, which is symbolic of the way God is such a constant and strong presence in our life till this day. And we have the 4, which suggests what God expects of us and demands of us, to come out from that shadow and to be what God needs us to be. So, Chag Sameach, Yom Tov. We may still have a chance to connect through social media or some other medium before Pesach, but until then, and if not, I miss you all. I love you all. And I hope you're well. And I hope we can connect by phone or by FaceTime, by text message, something. I've spoken to many of you. Many of us still have outstanding phone calls. But hopefully we can all connect in one way or another before Chag. Take care. Keep your hopes up. Keep your heads high. And we definitely need God to schlep us out of this year. And He did it then, and He'll do it now. Sei gesund.